is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. We begin with a look at India's worsening COVID crisis. Within a day on Monday, India has recorded more than 366,000 fresh COVID-19 cases and 3,000 deaths. Calls for a nationwide shutdown continue to grow, but so far Prime Minister Narendra Modi has resisted to take swift action. Earlier, the World Health Organization sounded an alarm about a highly contagious coronavirus variant recently detected in India. With the mounting COVID cases and the new variant potentially being resistant to vaccines, how will India contain the virus and effectively roll out vaccines? Let's loop in our panelists to find out about the latest in India and also how vaccines are being used and debated in different parts of the world. Take a look. For more on the latest with COVID-19 pandemic, joining us in Seattle, Dr. Alice Kim Kyung-tan, internist at Ms. Medi Women's Hospital from South Korea. In Mumbai, Sanjeeva Srivastava, professor from Indian Institute of Technology in Bombay. In Philadelphia, Professor Glenn Golton, director of the Center for Global Health with University of Pennsylvania. In New Haven, Xi Chen, associate professor from Yale School of Public Health. Welcome. So, Mr. Srivastava, we were talking to one another 2 days ago. Tell us more about the latest in India.
All right. Well, I would say that it has not changed drastically what we discussed, a week ago versus now, because we still see very high surge of the numbers, and we don't see, very drastic change in terms of overall what we have seen earlier. Major thing that at least international support has started coming in now. Quite a bit of international community has started supporting, and also I would say that people have started knowing, that this is the not same virus what we have seen earlier. So this is a much rapidly growing virus. So now they are getting more educated, and probably they are taking more preventive measures ahead of time.
Okay.
I'd like to quote here in the same line that yesterday itself, one of the states here, Goa, their health minister declared that, people should start taking the antiviral medicine ahead of time.
Since you talk about Goa, I understand every 2 people tested in that state, one of them tested positive for COVID-19. And that is only about the people that have the possibility to be tested. So, Mr. Srivastava, how much percentage of the population do you think COVID-19 is really spreading in India from the numbers and also on-the-ground analysis?
I think asymptomatic cases are much larger as compared to what we see the symptomatic and severe cases, because most of the people are still quite mild, and many times I don't think they are even going for testing, given the so much delays of the testing and the hurdle of all lockdown. So community is much larger infected as compared to what even people know about it. Large number of people from the same family, if anybody is carrying infection, they will all be pretty much asymptomatic. Some are already showing symptom, some are asymptomatic. So I would say really huge population has already been infected by now.
Right.
And especially in some metro states, especially like Delhi and Mumbai, some of the major cities, when we see huge surge, I think, a large population is already infected.
Complete lockdown, that's what some of the health experts have been suggesting. Do you think India is into that idea, briefly?
I think last year there was complete lockdown, which Modi government declared, that definitely controlled the this particular surge of the first wave. Very difficult to even think about the poverty line people, and lot of migration issues and giving people job. So I think considering all that, this time so far the strategy has been different. Do lockdown into those places where there is high surge and where things are uncontrolled.
Yeah.
But rather than not to have a complete countrywide lockdown.
Another thing about the vaccines for India, we understand it's about 10% of the population that the vaccine numbers inside India could be able to provide. But of course, the injection inoculation is far from that. Do you see that is picking up with the right speed?
I think there are two major constraints here. Number one is, of course, the supply chain production itself is the major problem. And now coming the lot of foreign aids and lot of raw material coming from states and other places probably will ramp up the vaccine production, because that cannot happen overnight and boost up for the whole population.
I see.
Number two, the major challenge is all the medical infrastructure, the medical staff. They're all busy with helping the patients right now with their current problems, and even the general public is not as enthusiastic to go out for vaccination as they would have been after the first wave, which was happening earlier. So now people are actually really hesitant to go out because of lot of issues to get contraction of contamination even from outside.
Yeah.
So both of them definitely impeding the way of really doing the mass inoculation right now. But hoping that maybe in a month or so, if situation improves here for the second wave, and while we are already getting lot of vaccine production getting boosted up, probably the mass production may happen by June end and July.
June, July, that's what you're looking at. Last question to you for this round. What about the hospitals? There were reporting in the media. I do not know whether it's true or not, because sometimes the media reports tend to be very much exaggerated, sometimes it's understated. The situations in most of the Indian hospitals are overwhelming, of course, but on the other hand, there are not enough provision of any support to the patients, and many patients would love to get out of the hospital. They would prefer to go back home. What would that mean? Is it true?
Well, I think that's up to a certain extent, it's quite true that most of the medical infrastructure was already very limited. Given this immediate problem, which was, we were not prepared for it.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, ramping up so many ventilators and oxygen tank supplies, everything was not to the same proportion what we have seen right now in the second wave. So definitely medical infrastructure has been limited. If you, see yourself here as one of the family member for a patient whose oxygen level is really, going down, then you will see how much challenge you have to face to move around to different hospitals to really find a bed or to really find any aid. So that is definitely a reality. But nevertheless, I think, most of the people are already now getting quite a bit educated themselves, because knowing the situation, most people are already measuring these things themselves all the time. Like they're now routinely measuring their oxygen level and looking at all the body parameters, so that only at the dip point they're able to take the medical assistance. Otherwise, they are doing home medication.
Got it. Thank you so much for briefing all of us about the latest as you see in India. Let me go to the other panelists. Of course, India is top on the priority in terms of crisis of COVID-19. Ms. Tan, tell me more about your thoughts. What would India's development mean for the rest of the world?
I think what's going on in India is a huge wake-up call, a huge warning to the international community in terms of how we need to stay humble, and also that we need to be very cautious in our measured return to normal life, especially regarding gatherings, gathering indoors, but also outdoor gatherings of large numbers of people. I think the ripple effects are twofold, many, but the main are twofold. The first is the spread of the variants of the virus to the entire Indian subcontinent and also the neighboring countries that share a border with India. That includes Afghanistan, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Myanmar, China. Some of these countries, in terms of readiness for a huge surge of COVID-19, their readiness may be questionable, and certainly in terms of population density, for example, Bangladesh, if a similar situation as what's going on in India were to explode in Bangladesh, it would also have catastrophic consequences.
Absolutely.
The second ripple effect, of course, has to do with vaccine production, because the world's largest vaccine manufacturer, the Serum Institute, is located in India. And they had contracted to export more than 1 billion doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine. But of course, with everything that's going on domestically, and also their own factories not being able to ramp up production, many countries around the world are now waiting and wanting for vaccines.
This is a devastating situation. We've already seen some kinds of opening up in different parts of the world, but what is going on right now may further delay that process, isn't it, Mr. Golton? To what extent?
Yeah, I think that would be the wise approach. I think, unfortunately, here in the United States, we have two different populations, roughly, of individuals, those individuals who have been vaccinated and understand the tremendous risks of viral infection, and then a minority population, but still a substantial number of people in the United States who have never believed that the pandemic was a serious threat, have resisted taking vaccines. And so we have in the United States a substantial number of individuals who remain at risk and remain percolating relatively low levels of viral infection compared, for example, to India, but still quite high. So, I think the impact of the virus varies widely by country. The role that the governments have played in the different countries in communicating the very dangers of this virus, and the rollouts of the vaccines.
Mr. Xi-Chun, tell me more about your thoughts on this. Earlier, we heard that Dr. Tan also mentioned about the impact on the neighboring country, China, of course, bordering India. So far, the number is still low, but what kind of challenge does it mean for that subcontinent and also for the world current situation fighting COVID-19 with the variant?
I think there's still a large uncertainty about this wave of surging. The world has been closely watching because the number of deaths and infections are both undercounted due to the stress to the healthcare system in India. And also the virus sequencing has not been done enough. Unless we understand better about all kinds of variants, then we know whether the vaccine can be effective. But so far, some evidence without peer review shows that the mRNA vaccine and the AZ vaccine and even India's the local Covaxin vaccine are still effective against the new variant in India. But more studies need to be done because all those evidence are from the lab, not the large number of studies. And as the vaccine maker, I think India is in a very special situation because it's a major vaccine maker. It will affect tremendously about its production. And also it will, since India has been in an emergent situation, the surrounding countries will be having a higher demand.
Right.
So the higher demand and shorter supply in the vaccine will both driven the shortage further in the vaccination.
Dr. Tan, we see earlier there was the hope that the vaccine will be able to handle at least some of the most variants we've seen in the UK, for example, in Brazil and some of the other places. But now we are seeing a clear trend that the vaccine and the research of vaccine could hardly catch up with the outbreaks. So relying on the vaccines, will that be the real solution for all of us, or closing the border will be the only solution?
Well, as it's been up until now, it's going to take a multifactorial approach. However, when we're talking about vaccines and the variants, some of the variants are what we call escape variants, and some of the variants are non-escape variants. So the D614G and the B117, these are the Wuhan and the UK variants. These seem to be fairly well covered by the current vaccines. And so when we're talking about countries that have predominantly these variants circulating, then using any of the vaccines really that are on the market should protect against these variants. More concerning, however, are the B1351 South African and the P1 Brazil variants. The WHO, I think they just announced that the Indian B1617 variant is also a variant of concern. But I don't think we're in a position to really pick and choose our strategy regarding vaccination. I think trying to vaccinate as many people as quickly as possible is the best strategy forward, and we can't really pick and choose at this time. That being said, I know that Moderna and Pfizer are working on version 2.0 of their vaccines to tackle the B1351, the South African variant, a little bit better. And so hopefully when that new vaccine, the updated version is available, it will be deployed in countries where that variant is predominant.
Professor Golden, we see the WHO has been adding to its list of emergency use of vaccines, including some of those now latest from China even. So how do you see the more diversity of the vaccines will be able to help with the current crisis that we're seeing rolling out right now?
The more vaccine, the better. And while there is some variation in the effectiveness of the different vaccines, for example, the most efficacious are the mRNA Pfizer Moderna vaccines at well over 90%. The least efficacious are the Sinopharm and Sinovac vaccines, which are between 60 to mid 70%. But that's still enough compared to no protection. I actually think the bigger risk here is as the infections continue to percolate, there's no selective pressure. The virus is mutating randomly in non-immunized people. The danger to me is in immunized people who very small percentage of them, well under 0.1%, can be infected. And then there's a selective pressure in those individuals, even if a very small number get infected, that the virus would mutate and be under pressure to directly evade immune detection generated by the vaccines. And that's the real danger beyond the catastrophic loss of life as this virus continues to percolate around the world.
Dr. Xichen, do you see that as danger?
With more replication of the virus, there's more danger about the mutation, which can avoid or evade the immune system. So I think the WHO's efforts to approve emergency use listings of 6 vaccines so far, and hopefully the Sinovac will be approved soon, will be a key step for inclusion of those vaccines in the COVAX. And we know the inclusion of those vaccines in the emergency use is the first step towards negotiating with the producers, manufacturers to distribute and produce those vaccines in the global scale. That would be very important. And as we know, although the WHO already have the COVAX have 6 vaccines, including Sinopharm, but each of them have their strengths and limitations. So they have to be combined, complement each other in use in different contexts globally.
Interestingly, related to the vaccines, Mr. Srivastava, India is the biggest vaccine producers, one of the biggest, and yet, because of the vaccines are mainly produced for other companies to distribute it elsewhere, not in India, one of the biggest developing countries in the world. So here comes to the dilemma, isn't it? So what do you see from India on the ground as the solution?
Serum Institute of India, I think they definitely have huge production capability. So they should be able to ramp up easily given their strength. Right now, the major issues are, because of pandemic, a lot of even manpower, workers, everybody's getting infected. So even they are also, getting reduced to the capacity, what otherwise they could have done. But hopefully with, a lot of other aids coming in, this should really be able to ramp up quite a bit. And also the co-vaccine, which is the India make, with the inactivated virus, even that production also going on with the full swing, although that's going to take slightly longer time and not with the same magnitude what Covishield can be used for that purpose. But both of them together should be able to really ramp up quite a bit, and that's already happening right now.
The WHO, rather the WTO, has been discussing about the IPR issue of vaccines, and the U.S. volunteered, the U.S. government, I should say, volunteers to donate, in a way, the IPR and do not make it an issue. But the companies are having very different opinions, and different countries are having very different opinions. So, Professor Galton, is IPR issue of the vaccine the issue we're facing right now, particularly at this time when we see the crisis? Or are we seeing a whole set of issues that all urgently need to be resolved at this moment?
I have to say, you know, for a manufacturer to never have produced, for example, an mRNA vaccine, and to now try to ramp up with that once the intellectual property hurdles are overcome, that's going to be months and months and months. And so, in fact, what we've got to do is open the pipeline, and that means easier distribution of supplies, because there's also a supply chain problem,
Yes.
particularly for the vaccines that are vector vaccines, like the Covishield AstraZeneca vaccine, or the Novavax vaccine, which I know is also going to be made in India, which is a protein-based vaccine. They have much greater requirements on infrastructure and unique products. And then also the distribution network really should be a global network that the WHO should be coordinating, so that individual countries aren't coordinating these. I think those are much, much more important than the intellectual property issues in the short term.
Sitting where you are in Philadelphia, how do you see this division between the Biden administration's volunteering to donate, in a way, the IPR, while the businesses who are really owning the IPR are saying no?
Well, look, it's a straight, you're talking to a highly capitalistic system here in the United States and in many other parts of the world. And I think it's time that if in fact, and I happen to believe that releasing the intellectual property is the right thing to do, it should have been done months and months ago, then we would maybe be in a different situation. And the only way to overcome that is for the government to back the companies through some kind of pricing arrangement so that they can recover their costs of development.
Dr. Tan, how do you see that issue, the division between the politicians? We do not know whether it's for diplomacy or soft power. You never will be able to know why they do something. But how do you see this division between the real business ownership of IPR and U.S. politicians, the current administration?
First of all, I think we need to make the process of negotiation for the price of vaccines much more transparent. I think that it's widely known that pharmaceutical companies, they're not losing money from the pandemic. But I don't know that anyone knows exactly how much they are actually profiting. And I think this information should be made public, and we should know exactly, what the financial situation is. And in terms of government subsidizing the pharmaceutical companies to waive their international patents and their property rights, I think this is enticing. In terms of as a concept,
you are putting extra scrutiny on the pharmaceutical companies that are producing or owning IPR of vaccines for COVID-19. Is that what you're suggesting? These companies might resent that too, because they could have quarterly earnings reports coming out, just like every company. Should they receive extra scrutinization?
Yes, I think so. I mean, this is a global issue. And a lot of the funding that supported the research and the distribution and the whole vaccine manufacturing process, a lot of that money was donated, right? By Gavi, by CEPI, by Operation Warp Speed. And so I think the public, because there was so much government money poured into the development of many of these vaccines, I think the public, they are owed a right to information regarding, profits and the financials of where the companies stand. In terms of technology transfer and licensing, I was asked this question yesterday by a radio program in Korea, and the question was, would this lead to vaccine self-sufficiency in South Korea? And my answer is yes. If all of the vaccine manufacturers in South Korea, say, started to manufacture the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is a one-shot vaccine, I think, in a matter of months, weeks to months, we could have vaccine self-sufficiency. That, of course, is if the supply chain, were to support this.
Yeah.
But we have factories, we have manufacturing capacity. The thing is, we know already which vaccines work.
Yeah.
There are factories around the world which could start to make these vaccines that we know work, but it's not happening. And I think we need to push for this to happen, because the world cannot wait. We cannot wait 2-3 years to have the kind of supply ramped up, because the demand is immediate. We can't wait.
Dr. Chen, how do you see that question?
We definitely want to make it more affordable to every corner of the world, but we don't want to simply waive the patent fee to disincentivize producers to take the big risk to make innovative pharmaceutical products in this pandemic and the next ones. And we want to give them fair compensation, and without doing that, simply giving the patent waiver, will not only disincentivize them, but also in the near term may also set off worldwide rates for raw material competition, and everyone will be competing for raw materials, which may further strengthen the safety and efficient manufacturing of COVID shots. And we know that there's a large black market, underground market, that producing all kinds of vaccines. And since the patent fee is waived, then everyone can produce, and we have no control about the safety and quality. And I think the major producers are try their best to make sure they can ramp up the production, but given the disincentives, I'm not sure how they can better prepare for their mass production. So we have to leave that to the industry to decide. And in the meantime, I think through the public financing, we can do better to make it more affordable to those vulnerable population without sacrificing the safety and the supply of the product.
Certainly, this is a big topic to be debated, but I hope the consensus can come sooner than later. Thank you so much for every one of you participating in our discussion, providing your analysis and the very important from the ground information. Alice Kim Kyung-tan, Sanjeeva Srivastava, Glenn Golton, and Xi Chen, thank you so much. That's a conversation I had with doctors from different parts of the world of the latest crisis in India and the latest debate about vaccines.